name's Chris. Welcome back to the shed. Welcome to Flat Tank Friday for another week. This week I've had a real go at things. This is me at the end of it, but you're just about to see it. It's been a good week. I've enjoyed it. After last week's heat shrinking of the sprocket onto the boss, I was pretty pumped up. That's about as excited as I've been for a long time. I will weld it into place for those of you who are thinking about it, but for now it's really tight, and it might even hold, not sure. This week I've attacked the engine / gearbox plates to try and mount the gearbox. Up until now the gearbox has just sat there, there's no holes in the plates to take it. So I worked out why I didn't have holes. I didn't have the mill when I built those plates originally, and I just left it. Also wasn't sure what gearbox I'd run. I didn't have a gearbox, I didn't have a clutch, so I just left the holes. So that's what it was. So this is a set of original plates off mid-20s Beezer that I used to locate the holes and to prune those plates down a little bit so the gearbox would sit better. Anyway, lots of machining, lots of frustration, lots of stuff, and I've tried to condense it down to a video that you might enjoy. Anyway, cheers. Well, time for disassembly to get these gearbox mounting plates or engine mounting plates out. I'm going to get the tanks off and put them away for safekeeping, because if this thing falls over, I'll have a mess on my hands. Then I've got to get clutch off, gearbox out, but it's just loosely sitting there. I think I'll remove the rear wheel, and then I will jack up underneath the engine. Because of the way the bike is made, when you take the gearbox plates off, the bike will start to fold at the pivot points here, and of course here, because there's nothing in the middle. This piece is structural and integral to the frame, so we're going to try just using the front mounts and jacking up the engine perhaps, or at least letting it take the weight of the engine supported. I'm going to get on with this and bring you back when I've made some progress. Back end out of the bike and the tank's off. Of course the tanks are just held in by the leather straps, so that's not a big deal. The back end comes out of the bike really easily too. The wheel comes out, brake plate undoes, and it's all good. The frame comes out up the top here, and then it unbolts here, and the whole thing just comes off, and that's really easy. Gearbox spacer is out, and so now I'm up to removing the foot pegs and removing the roller and the center stand assembly. So that's a bit of a pain in the bum, because all that's a bit hard to get in there and a bit fiddly, but we'll get it all off and then I'll bring you back for a bit more. Nothing's very sophisticated here today. A block of wood from the wood pile, sitting underneath the engine and holding everything up. So I'm just about to slide this off, and I thought I'd show you how it works. BSA have a big spigot that goes through that frame plate and into the frame, and I remade these spigots off some originals. I'm going to grab a hammer, knock that out and bring you back. So coming back to the frame, there's the spigot or the spacer or whatever you want to call it that goes back into the frame. In the BSA it's pinned, and when I made this originally about 4 years ago I hadn't worked out how to pin it. Now I've bought a mill and some roll pins. I'll be able to pin that back in so it doesn't turn. And then the frame plate, and sorry for the camera work, slides over the top, and the frame plates are pinned on the BSA as well. That's how everything's held together. Now you can see the moth-eaten plates, as I've drilled numerous holes to get things right. In reality, these are the holes that need to disappear, so that pin needs to come out and those holes welded up, or in reality I will probably get new plates cut, but we'll see how we go. I'll push on, get the other side off, and then I'll try and get set up on the mill to mill some holes for the gearbox mounts. The fans you can hear in the background are the welder and the extraction fans, or blowing some fresh air around the shop. Of course, I weld like a blind man. While I had these out, I decided I'd fill the holes, and it's those two holes that I'm filling. And of course this one's upside down. So I filled the holes with weld. It took way too long and I've ground back way too much. But you know what, they're filled and it's probably the best I can do. So I'm more or less happy with that for now. I'm going to try and fill the others and see how I go, and then I'll push on and pretend it's not there. Well, there we are with the holes welded up. Did a much better job of the second one than the first one. Bit more technique and a bit less grinding. Anyway, we move on. So in the foreground are original BSA engine mounts from this model bike. And you can see that I modelled the mounting points for the mag engine off the originals. And when you lay them together, there are bolts that will mount up, will line up, and that's how I intend to cut the slots. That I'm going to cut these back to the size of the BSA ones where the holes line up, and then I'm going to cut the slots in for the gearbox so that the gearbox sits in the frame where it used to sit using the original slots, and then I'll be able to build some adjustment. So I need to mark these out, and or perhaps bolt them together, mark them out, and then cut them down to size, especially this lip here, so the gearbox sits in the right place. Well, this is the plan at this point. This is 3 engine mounts, gearbox mounts, all bolted together. The original, which is the top one, and then the 2 from the special. Now they're slightly different. They're made different for each side to fit in as tight around the engine as they could. So they're slightly different at the top and in various places. I've just spent the last hour or so grinding this line back to get this line as close to the top as I can so that the gearbox mounts correctly off that top line. I think that's important to give the gearbox backwards and forwards movement. I could probably take a little bit out of here, but I'm trying to leave as much meat on the new engine plates as I can, especially around this mounting hole here where it's wide, because on the others it's a bigger hole. So I think I'm ready. I'm going to set up in the mill and try and drill and mill these 2 slots. Here's my setup on the mill. I've got the plates bolted together, sat on parallels, so that the end mill won't cut the parallels, because they're nice parallels. I've got clamps, 2 at one end and 1 at the other. Admittedly, they're both pulling down on unsupported areas, so in theory it could bow in the middle a little bit. But I think for the purposes of what I'm trying to do, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to blaze away and do that. In respect to tramming the work to the cutter, I simply did a Mr. Pete, if you like. I used the cutter itself to tram it in. I put it into the slot and I locked the quill, and I wound backwards and forwards, and then moved to the second slot to see if I was all in line, and just towed it backwards and forwards for probably 3 or 4 minutes until I was happy with where it was, tightened it all down and tested it again. So I'm about good to go. I'm going to use cutting fluid in a spray bottle because I don't have a fluid pump, and we'll see how we go. Alright, here we go. Let's see if we can get some live action. This is my answer to a coolant pump, and we'll see how we go. Well, it's cutting. Not necessarily well, but it is cutting. And we're just about through. To all the machinists out there, I apologise. I'm no machinist. But I'm a better machinist than I am a welder. I think I'm trying to take too much of a cut at once, so I'm going to come out of that and shut down for a minute and clean up. So I've gone through, and that's been a little trouble, but I think I better take several cuts at this. I was trying to cut all of that at once, and that seems like a folly. So let's try and take a few cuts. That sounds better. Unlock the quill and have a clean out. Some chips being caught in the bottom. That's better. We'll go again. We're just about through, I think. One more cut, I'm hoping. Might even be through. No, we're not quite through, but we must be close. There we go. And a clean up cut. All right. I can see that we're through. I'm not going to bore you with the other slot. The poor man's coolant pump works really well. I must say, I just mix up coolant in a bucket and I just spray it on. Now it makes a mess and you've got to clean up a lot afterwards, but if it's all you've got, then it's kind of all you got and you make do with what you got. I'm not going to bore you. I'll do the other one off camera and we'll bring it all back when I'm pulling this apart and we'll see how it turned out. So this is where I'm up to. I've cleaned the mill up, wiped all the cutting compound off and got all the swarf out and given it a vacuum and a clean up and just a bit of lubricant to get that water-based cutting fluid out. I've got the engine gearbox mounts back in the frame and I'm just starting to button a few things up. I've just made a new bolt for the back of the gearbox mount because it was too large on the other side, and actually made a bolt rather than a shaft with two nuts. I'm actually quite pleased with my welding up of holes, and you know, as a blind man welding, I've done a pretty good job. The slots themselves, I'm pretty happy with those too. I think they've cut really well. They're certainly in the same plane and they're in the same plane on both sides. So I feel good about that. And they're all in the same plane in relation to 1, 2, 3 holes or 4 holes. So I think that's a good result too.
So I feel as though that's the end of day one for me. I haven't been working on this all day, but I'm going to come back and have another go at this tomorrow and then wind everything up and show you what is what. This is the underneath view of the bike. I've got it, I wouldn't say safely propped up on a block of wood, but it's propped up to put the centre stand back in. And I'm going to try and bring you in and show you the centre stand mechanism and the spring. It's a very heavy spring, but the stand I do want it to hold up. So it's pinned and sleeved across the centre. And then here's the gearbox. Excuse the sound of the stool rolling. And the gearbox is bolted in just loosely, and it's pushed forward as far as it goes. It's just on some basic bolts that I could buy at the hardware store. I live in a small town where you can buy metric bolts in stainless and high tensile, or you can buy imperial bolts in just steel, I suppose, whatever it is. They're not great, but they'll do for now. Everything's back in. I'm about to get the brake pedal back on and that mechanism, and then I'll get the rear wheel in and drop it on the ground, and we'll have a bit more of a look at it. Here's the Footpeg assembly. I'm just about to put it back on the bike. I've given it a clean up and tidy up the threads that have become a bit manky. I've just welded this pin into this foot rest to stop it spinning. It's always been just loose because I hate welding. This is how it works. These pins go into the engine / gearbox mounts to stop the foot pegs spinning, and there's one on the other peg as well. And then you can locate them where you want. This sleeve goes in the middle, in between the plates, and that's to stop the plates compressing and you bend the plates. It seems to tighten up really well. I've done it on other bikes and it works. Of course, this is all just made up. None of this is real. It's just the way I see it. So I do what I've got with what I've got, and it turns out okay, more or less. So I'm going to get this back in the bike, and then we can have a good look at what I've done. Well, now, that's been a job and a half. Just going to pop that nut back on the end of the crankshaft so I don't lose it, and pull him over, hand tight. So all that's done up, pretty much hand tight, and everything's good, I think. Really happy with the gearbox mounting. It allows a lot of adjustment backwards and forwards. I've got it almost pulled. I've probably got 7 or 8 mil left to go at the front, and I've probably could go back a similar amount at the back. The roller and the clutch and the front sprocket all line up really well. The roller, I'm not sure whether it'll work as a long-term thing or not, but I hope it does. It was certainly heavy duty when I bought it. The chains have gone together really well. I needed to use a half link on the primary drive there, but it's probably just a little bit tight at the minute, and the back is maybe good. It's got a bit of up and down, so it feels good. So maybe just a little bit of adjustment to do there. Other than that, I'm really pleased with the whole outcome. Welded up the frame mounts, those ugly holes I had, remounted the foot pegs, built a new shaft for that, and overall got the rear chain fitted. The sprockets line up. Really pleased with that too. It's really hard to see down the line of the bike, but I'm pretty happy with the way everything lines up. So that's been a good outcome. The only thing that needed done was the sprocket at the front, and the heat shrinking on of that is probably one of the funnest things and most satisfying things I've had happen for a long time. I'm going to call that good for now. That's been Flat Tank Friday for another week. I hope you've enjoyed it. That was a mountain of work. To give you perspective, I'd say I've got 6 hours work in getting those plates off, machined, back on, gearbox mounted, and the chains on. gives you some perspective of how long these things take. Anyway, that's Flat Tank Friday. Have a great weekend. Cheers.